Newsman with Anjali Comment.
The best-selling Chilean novelist Isabel Allende is out with a new book. It's called Island Beneath the Sea. It's her first novel in 4 years. The story takes readers back 200 years in time to the slave uprising that led to the creation of the world's first independent Black republic, Haiti. It's a fictional love story centered on one woman born into slavery in colonial Haiti, or Saint-Domingue, as the former French colony was once called. But the story unfolds against world-changing events at the turn of the 19th century, and the characters are dragged by history from Haiti to New Orleans.
Isabel Allende is renowned as one of Latin America's greatest novelists. She's the author of 18 books, including House of the Spirits, Paula, Daughter of Fortune. They've been translated into 27 languages, sold over 50 million copies around the world. Isabel Allende now lives in California, but she was born in Peru in 1942 and traveled the world as the daughter of a Chilean diplomat. Her father's first cousin was Salvador Allende, Chile's president between 1970 and 73. When Augusto Pinochet seized power in a CIA-backed military coup in 73, Isabel Allende fled from her native Chile to Venezuela. Well, we're joined now by Isabel Allende, who's right here in New York. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
There's so many things to talk with you about, but let's go right to the book first.
Okay.
Island Beneath the Sea. The research you did for this book, from Haiti to New Orleans, talk about why you chose to take this on.
I didn't choose it. I think the subject chose me. I wanted to write a book about New Orleans because I just fell in love with the city when I did some research for another book. And then I found out that much of the French flavor of the city, the cuisine, the voodoo and all that, comes from 10,000 refugees that fled from the Haitian Revolution. It was not called Haiti then, at the end of the 1700s. And they came, some to Cuba, some to France, back to France, and many to New Orleans. They were white French colonizers that came also with their domestic slaves and their African mistresses and their children of color. And they changed the look of the city, the flavor. And so in the research, I started focusing more on Haiti. So half the book happens in the plantation when the slave revolt started. It was an amazing historical event, the only slave revolt in history that has succeeded. And these people just did something that is unbelievable.
Can you talk a little bit more about this revolt? You talk about Toussaint Louverture.
Yes, Toussaint Louverture joined the revolt a year later. But it started, the alternatives for the slaves were to escape, and they would go to the mountains if they could make it, or death. They would be exploited to death. The idea was that they would last between 4 and 6 years and then be replaced by new slaves that were coming all the time into the island. So the conditions were so atrocious that they didn't even have children. And when they rebelled, these people came from different places in Africa. What kept them together was the obsession with freedom, of course. They connected through the drums and the spiritual strength of the belief that they were empowered by the laws, and that from the island beneath the sea, from Guinea, from paradise, the souls of the dead would come and help them in battle. So for every man that was fighting against the cannons of Napoleon, there were 10,000 souls fighting. I thought it was just... And then people say, well, this is magic realism. No, it's not magic realism. It's always magic realism when it's somebody else's religion, you know? Somebody else's language is dialect.
Tell us about Tete.
Tete is, or Sarite, is a slave that I start with her when she's 9 years old. She's sold to the owner of a plantation, a white French planter that is not a bad guy, really. And he has a wife who has gone crazy. Many European women that married people in the colonies went crazy. They couldn't stand the weather, they couldn't stand the mosquitoes, and they couldn't stand a life of terror. Because, of course, the slaves were terrorized, but also the owners of the slaves, because they feared an uprising, they feared that they would be poisoned, they feared that they would be knifed at night. So everybody lived in fear. And that created a state of permanent violence. So this Tete has to raise the child of this mad woman whom she loves as her own child, and then she has children with the master. So there's a lot of interesting things in the relationship between the masters and the slaves. There's all this struggle of power and race and all that, but also there's love and dependency and incest often. Nobody speaks about incest in times of slavery, but it was very frequent. And it was not a crime. It was not considered a crime. Rape, for example, was considered rape only if the woman was white. Otherwise, there was no crime.
Can you talk a little bit more about your research process? Did you go to Haiti? Did you read books of history? How did you develop such a fine sense of the flavor of this moment 200 years ago?
I had been in Haiti before, but it was a different country 200 years ago. So it didn't make much sense to research Haiti now. But I did read a lot of history books. Unfortunately, history is written by white men, always the winners. And the voices of the poor people, the women, the children, the people who were defeated, it's never in the history books. So I researched a lot in correspondence of the time, travel lodges of the time, people who, of course I have then to study medicine, herbs, trade of slaves, go back to Africa to see where the slaves came from, the ships where they were transported. All that's very interesting. And it's a lot of research, 4 years of research.
It's remarkable, and then to create the figures that you created. So talk about Zakate Tete, the girl that you started with at 9, who was enslaved to this man, Valmorin, had his children, had their children, and then went to New Orleans, and how her life transformed.
The life in the plantation was horrible. Then the slave revolt started, and the violence was unimaginable. And then they were pushing the whites, either killing them or pushing them to the shores. And then finally, when they burnt Le Cap, 100 ships left Le Cap with refugees.
Le Cap is Cape Haitian.
Yeah. And so she goes with her master and the children. There's a moment in the book that to me is the most important moment when Tete has to choose between staying in the island with her lover, whom she adores, and be free, or remain a slave, stay with the master, but keep the children. And she keeps the children and goes with the master. And I think that most women would have done the same. If you have to choose between freedom and the lover or your children, most women stay with their children.
And then talk about New Orleans.
So then they go to New Orleans, where life was very different. There was a class of free people of color that had economic resources, education, because the boys were sent to France and they came back as professionals. The girls went to the Ursula school. It was a very different situation. And in New Orleans, the slave trade was already abolished. So slaves were very expensive. It was an investment of capital. Therefore, they were well treated, much better than in Haiti, where they were disposable. And this brings me, if you allow me, to something that is happening today. Today, there are 27 million slaves in the world that have been counted. We don't know how many more that have not been counted. And it's not only what we always think, slave sex, brothels in Cambodia. No. There are labor slaves all over the world, in every single country. No country admits that it's happening, but it is happening. And the difference is that these slaves of today are very cheap. They don't have a voice, they're invisible, there are very few abolitionist movements. Nobody sees them, and they're disposable. You can buy a girl for $10, $20. And there are whole villages in debt bondage in Pakistan only, 1 million. There are slaves in the fishing industry, in the lumber industry. But my book is not only about slavery. It's also about a time, a fascinating time for humanity, when the Western world was changing. Because